the Mentoring Matters discussion room. And this is being sponsored by the Mentoring Club. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide a mentoring community for aspiring and seasoned leaders. Anywhere in the world, we help working people find mentors who can guide them to develop skills they need to achieve their career and life goals. We help mentees fulfill their goals through meaningful work that creates positive impact in the world. As mentees become leaders, our dream is for them to become mentors to others. For this session, we started a series which we call Career and Life Journeys of Mentors. We'd like to be able to share the stories of mentors so that if their stories resonate with you, either as a mentor or as a mentee, then we would have already done part of our mission, which is to help people make a positive impact in the world. So we are here today to listen to the career and life journey of David Rowley. Oh, and before I continue, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-moderators, Hong, Daniel, and of course, Pete, who's a regular. And thank you, David, for being here. So David joined the Mentoring Club as a mentor this year. David will share with us his beginnings in the high-tech arena, major decisions he made along the way and why he made them, and what he is up to now. So good morning, David. Thank you for being here and for being our guest mentor for this session. How is your journey so far? How did you begin in high-tech? Where are you now?
I've been in tech for 35 years. That wasn't my initial plan. Before I went to college, I thought I was going to be a writer because that was something that I was pretty good at and it came naturally to me. So I figured I would pursue that. It was kind of an easy path for me to take, I suppose. I got early exposure to computers and to writing software before I went to college. There's a certain satisfaction that you get when you write something, when you write a story or an essay or a poem or something like that, and other people read it and they give you positive feedback, and that really feels good. It sort of stimulates the endorphins in your brain. I felt a similar sort of feedback mechanism when I had a chance to write software, even as a kid. One thing I realized was that since it satisfied my brain in the same way, it was also sort of, there was a scarcity of that skill set and there was value associated with it. I decided I was going to pursue that instead, and that's what I set out to do. Before I even got to college, though, I had kind of an interesting experience. And I mentioned this in my LinkedIn post, so I think I have to tell this story, otherwise I might let some people down. My first real job in tech, I suppose, was an internship job that I had before I started college. So between high school and college, I got this internship job because I received a scholarship from Rockwell International. One of the things that they were building back in the day was they were the major contractor for the space shuttle. This was 1982. I got a job at Rockwell International as an intern. I was working in the department that was basically the bug tracking system or the defect tracking system. I was this fresh-faced kid. I show up in this huge campus that is just big warehouses and buildings and tens of thousands of people who work there. And it was pretty overwhelming, but it might be the coolest job I've ever had professionally. It was kind of downhill after that. I had the chance to, see what sort of defects would arise from the very early space shuttle program. Got to walk around this enormous campus where they constructed the crew compartment, the sort of the front end of the space shuttle. Got to actually wander around these enormous structures that were where those space shuttle components were being assembled, mostly distributing reports to NASA executives and Rockwell executives and stuff like that. So kind of a gopher job, but also the coolest job ever. A kid who wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up, getting to wander around space shuttles under construction, pretty darn cool. It kind of put me in my place. It made me feel very small, having sort of this gopher internship job, but it also made me feel like the sky's the limit. It was pretty exciting. So that's how, I guess, my first introduction to high tech before I even started my first day in college. I studied computer science. On one hand, I've had kind of a very linear, boring job, meaning I went to school, I studied computer science, I got a job as a software engineer, and I had sort of progressive responsibility. And here I am 35 years later as a CTO, as an executive, doing kind of the work that I studied for. But it's more complicated than that, of course. I started the first third of my career doing medical device and analytical device development and laboratory automation and that sort of thing. I just fell into that. There was a job opportunity that I took while I was actually still in college, and I benefited from a manager who believed that college students were able to contribute as employees even as they were still going to school. Because of his perspective there, I had that chance to really start my career early. He wasn't a formal mentor to me, but what a great example he set for me at the earliest stages of my career and set me on a path where I was on my way in a field of doing pretty heavy duty technical work, right? Building firmware and test software for devices that are used in a critical care environment. And honestly, I was just a kid. And if it weren't for that person, I don't know which way my career could have gone. I continued after that job to be involved in laboratory instrumentation, laboratory automation, and that kind of thing, and for over a dozen years. So it was very formative and just, like I said, kind of fell into it. It was kind of luck. I was very fortunate. Dave Bajaj is the name of the man who gave me that first chance. I am thankful for him to this day. He created a terrific example for me to follow. As I went through that dozen-year period of being a software engineer, working on this stuff, the things that drove me were about producing things. I was creating products. I was creating features and capabilities in these products. That's pretty rewarding because just like in those early days when I was a high school kid who got his first exposure to writing software, when you deliver something that other people value and appreciate, it triggers those endorphins in your brain and it's very satisfying. But it's also kind of like a drug in that you develop a tolerance and you have to increase your dosage to be satisfied in the same way. What felt like a pretty good accomplishment, maybe in the last release, isn't good enough. What have you done lately? Having to increase my dosage of getting a reward and producing more impactful artifacts ultimately led to burnout. At the completion of a very big project that should have been like the most rewarding thing that I had done up to that point in my career, instead felt very hollow and flat. It sort of made me reevaluate what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. So that was sort of an important juncture in my career path and why I decided to leave that particular industry and that domain. I felt a need to try out something very different. I went into a completely different domain. I went into financial services software, enterprise software for financial services, credit scoring and credit risk and credit origination and stuff like that. About as different from laboratory automation and analytical instrumentation as you could imagine. But I needed to do something different.
From there, you mentioned in one of our conversations that you then got attracted to startups. You are still doing advisory work in startups at this time.
Let's see, about 1999, that was Web 2.0, for those of you keeping track and the historians out there. There was a lot of excitement going on about the dynamic web and building actual applications that worked in the web and browser-based applications and that sort of thing. I had the choice of whether I kind of wanted to watch that happen or whether I wanted to participate. I jumped in and joined an early stage startup and got addicted to that. The things that were appealing about that were the same things that are scary about it, which is there's nowhere to hide. You have to wear a lot of hats. It's not like a big company where you can sort of find your little corner and go about your work. Everything feels very exposed. And by that time, I had already taken a leadership path. In that capacity, it's even more exposed because now you have to put your money where your mouth is and you have to actually build an organization and decide on how this team of people are going to go about their work. And it's not for the faint of heart, but if you become addicted to that, it really pulls you in. And so I had a series of startups over the course of 20 years, I guess it's been.
Wow.
And I learned a lot. And every one of them is different. And the one thing that it has done to shape me, and this kind of ties into my ability to help others and mentor others, is I could have stayed, let's say, with doing automation and laboratory instrumentation. And there were a lot of people who I worked with back then who had spent their entire careers doing that, right? I could have done that. And I know people who've done that, people who I worked with back then who basically stayed the course. Taking the step I did, it made me more of a generalist rather than a specialist. That's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? That means I've never really been able to develop that very deep commitment to any one particular industry or any one particular domain. But the other side of the sword is I've gotten exposure to a lot of different domains, a lot of different types of applications, and I understand the commonalities between them and also how they're different. I've been able to pick up a broader, more diverse set of experiences at the expense of going very deep and becoming a real expert in any one particular area. The one area that I've specialized in is in software product development and everything that goes into that and how you build and organize and run a company that does that across a bunch of different domains and applications. That gives me a big bag of skills and experiences that I can draw from and share with other folks, regardless of the specific kind of work that they're doing. It's been helpful for me as a mentor. I appreciate now, because there are times where I kick myself a little bit for not staying with one particular thing and being a career dedicated to one particular area. But at the same time, I appreciate now how that broad set of experiences helps me, dictates the kind of work that I can do best, where I can bring together that broad experience.
You mentioned that you really were attracted to journalism because you like writing. But at the same time, you were weighing the benefits of doing a career in journalism versus a field where there is scarcity, software engineering. And eventually you realize that software engineering, there is some use of your talent in writing. For those people who are trying to figure out what they're good at, what would be your advice to them?
It wasn't even that I liked writing. Sure, I like writing. I like doing a lot of things, but it was that I could see other people really struggling with it. It was hard for other people. It came naturally to me, right? It was easy for me to express myself in writing in an effective way. And the same was true for software development, is that other people thought it was some sort of black magic or something, but it wasn't hard for me. It just came very naturally. Sure, you like those things that come naturally to you. And so my advice is seek out those things where you seem to have sort of a natural gift for it. And if you can combine that with something where there is, I use the term scarcity, but a demand, right, for that capability, that is a good indication that that might be an area for you to pursue. It tends to be a very satisfying avenue just because those things that come naturally to you, especially when other people sort of value that, that feels pretty good. That's actually not just the way that I got into software and technology, but it's also what attracted me or got me into management. I got into management actually pretty early in my career, and it was the same kind of thing. I had examples of sort of good managers and bad managers, and it seemed like there were a lot of bad managers around. I just sort of fell into a leadership role. First, informally, like I would be the guy who would sort of organize meetings and planning sessions and figure out how we're going to sort of tackle a particular project and break it down and organize our work and that sort of thing. It came naturally. I wasn't appointed that role or anything. I was able to do it and was happy to do it. And it just sort of felt right. And other people kind of endorsed me in doing that. It's like, oh, yeah, Dave, you should do this. So that led me to this decision I had to make about whether I wanted to be, if I could be the best software engineer or if I could be the best manager and leader in a tech org. And I think that I could probably be a better manager, that's sort of the path that I can really excel at. Not because I felt like I was inadequate as a software engineer. I was a good software engineer. But there was this vacuum, I thought, of leadership. And it came naturally to me while I observed others struggling. And there's value associated with leadership. It's critical. That's what drew me there. The advice for others is you should be in touch with those things where similar situations, it's not going to be exactly like I'm describing it, but other ways where things come naturally to you while others struggle and there's a sort of a vacuum or a scarcity or demand for that thing, you should pursue that. That's a good way to sort of find success.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great advice. We all struggle. We came through that point where we're struggling. What's next? In your story, you mentioned transitioning out of the healthcare industry to financial industry, healthcare tech, right? What made you decide to go into that industry? What was the major influence?
For that one, it was really almost arbitrary. All I knew is I needed to do something else. I had kind of plateaued where I was. A lot of the folks who were in very senior roles in my company and other companies like it were PhD chemists and that sort of thing. And I wasn't going to go become a PhD chemist. I don't think I would be very good at that. I realized that I was still kind of an ambitious youngster, that wanted to progress, but I also experienced that burnout. Really, it's like anything other than this. Can I find something that I think I could understand and where I think there's good opportunity sort of to have transferable knowledge? So part of it was, let's see if all the things that I've learned about building products, building a certain type of product, do they transfer to building a very different kind of product? Because we're still building stuff, right? It's still technology, it's still software. And lo and behold, yes, most of that experience transfers quite directly. But of course, there's all kinds of new stuff. I learned all about writing enterprise software and developing systems for a different class of customer and user. Just as I had to learn all the details about the kind of systems I had been developing for the previous dozen years or so, I had to learn the language and the requirements and the ecosystem of this new environment. Mm-hmm. Turns out I actually didn't like it very much. I didn't stick around very long because it was right at that point where this Web 2.0 thing was happening. There was a lot of movement from Silicon Valley proper, the South Bay, up to San Francisco, which is more appealing to me just from a logistical standpoint. That gave me the opportunity, because it was a target-rich environment. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of opportunities out there to shift gears yet again. I was more confident because I had already shifted gears once, pretty dramatically. And so I felt like, yeah, I can do this. I can learn new stuff. Maybe that's something I'm good at too. Briefly touched on financial services, just enough to learn a thing or two, a springboard into a number of software startups.
The move to financial industry, the big why for that was the burnout from the previous job. And then moving on to financial industry, it was eventually connecting the dots backwards. It's like it became some kind of a transitional area where you realize that you can take on anything, that you can transition to anything that you decide to do. And therefore, that gave you the confidence to work on startups when Web 2.0 was happening.
It's not that rosy. Along the way, I found things I actually wasn't very good at. and things that I didn't like so much. So I had positive and negative experiences over the course of the next couple decades. But even from the negative experiences, I always try to extract the lessons and what I can take away from that. It takes a little while, right? You have to wait till the wounds heal a little bit before you can sort of see the positive there. One of the lessons that I learned, you're not going to be able to be the best at everything yourself. And especially as your scope of responsibility expands, there's a lot of things that have to get done. And you're not going to be the go-to person for each and every one of those. Maybe there are some people who have that capacity, not me. And I think not a lot of people. I use this analogy because it's something that a lot of people are familiar with. You're in a tech company or a software company or other kinds of companies that make things. You have to make these build versus buy decisions. So you have to say, is this something that we're going to build because we are going to be the best at building this? Nobody can build it better than us, so we're going to build it. But there are other things where that's not our core competency is. And so we're going to buy those things. Buy just sort of stands for either actually using a service or product or technology that somebody else has developed or partnering with somebody else or something. But that's not going to be where we're going to invest most of our resources. So that build versus buy decision is always tough because especially if you're a builder, you naturally think like, yeah, we can build this better than anybody. I want to build it. You tend to spend too much time trying to build everything yourself, over-index on building versus buying. And you have to learn, it comes with experience. You have to learn that you should only be focusing your energy on the things where you really are the very best, but a small number of those things. So that same approach and the same sort of challenges occur with you as an individual, and especially as you gain more and more responsibility. You have to decide which of the things that have to get done are you going to be the expert in? Are you going to sort of build yourself? And what are the things that you're going to buy? And in this case, I mean, you're going to surround yourself with people. You're going to build a team that brings in that expertise and that capability. I've learned the hard way. Some things that I thought I could be the best at, that I could build myself from a capability standpoint, I'm really not the best at. And it's a mistake to try to do that. I will not serve the company well, and I will not serve the team well, and I will not serve myself well by trying to fool myself into thinking that I could be the best there. What I need to do is surround myself and bring in talent and abilities that are expert in these areas. Like I said, I kind of learned it the hard way.
Actually, a great way of looking at it, because mostly the buy or build dilemma is presented to companies, right, to work decisions. But for you to also make a parallelism of build or buy to when we make our own personal decisions, that's a great point right there. Since we are in the mentoring club, I would be remiss if I don't ask you this question about mentoring. You did mention that there were influences, managers, really good managers that influenced how you became a manager yourself. You mentioned Dave Bija. I realized that mentoring, the way we know it now, is not what we grew up with in the 80s, 90s. Were there any consistent manager mentor that you would attribute why you are now actually giving back through mentoring?
I mentioned Dave Bajaj by name because I wanted to honor and respect him and that first role he played. I'll mention another name, Katie Escoffier. I don't think she's out there listening. She was a boss of mine fairly early on in my career. And she had this wonderful quality of being able to reduce my stress level when I felt like I had just too much on my shoulders, too much weight on my shoulders. She could lighten the load and ease the burden and help me, talk me off the ledge, allow me to really prioritize the things that I was going to do and the things that I could defer or the things that I could delegate or give to other people. And that was a tremendous lesson. I really appreciate her for that. And it's something that I've internalized. I want to be that kind of boss. I want to be able to, when people are stressed out, which they oftentimes are and feel overwhelmed, I want to be able to have a conversation with them and have them come away feeling like the load is a little bit lighter, that I help them manage their priority and get control over the situation. I'll mention another name. He might be out there. Bob Pasker was somebody who hired me early on when I started my startup journey. He taught me a number of hard lessons about pursuing what you're good at and recognizing what you're not good at, and gave me tremendous perspective. And I consider him a good friend and a mentor. And I continue to seek out his advice and his guidance and sometimes his tough love. These are people who really helped me. There are others that I won't mention by name today, but they've all sort of helped me. There are people that I've learned from who've taught me valuable lessons that were not great at what they did. They taught me through sort of negative examples. I value those relationships too, in kind of a funny way. What kind of prepared me to be a mentor in a formal capacity is just, as a leader, having folks who would come to you for guidance about their career, making decisions, for example, about whether they should be pursuing a management path versus sort of an individual contributor path, and helping them tune into the things that their reward system, what are the things that trigger the endorphins in their brains, making sure that they're not going down a path just because it seems like the logical one to do or the one that is more prosperous or something like that. I want people to choose paths for the right reason, and anything I can do to help illuminate that is positive, even if it means going to work for somebody else. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to see somebody sort of graduate for the right reasons. And even though it's a loss maybe for the team, for the company, and there's a little bit of personal loss, a feeling of loss, that's actually a happy outcome. So that experience translates into how I can help others in a mentorship capacity. Oftentimes just helping them listen to their hearts, listen to their heads, and make the right decisions about where they want to go from a career perspective. All of the different situations that I've been in with both positive and negative outcomes, I can pull from that and help just share how it went for me in a similar situation. That can be helpful.
You shared with me that you have actually joined organizations to become a mentor in different organizations. And you are one of our mentors in the mentoring club. When you choose to put yourself out there as a mentor in these organizations, what are the criteria or the decision factors that you have to consider? Why did you choose that organization? Why did you choose the mentoring club to be a part of?
In particular with the mentoring club, the mission and purpose of the organization, as you've described it, resonates with me very much. First and foremost, that's part of my criteria. Obviously, I'm looking for organizations that can help match me up with people who are looking for the kind of guidance and experience that I have to offer. Perhaps the most important thing is that these organizations are really ways to get exposure to folks that I might be able to help. And when it's a good match, it's very rewarding, certainly for me and hopefully for the folks that I get to talk to and get to help. Yeah, all this work I do is pro bono. I'm not sort of making money from being a mentor. I actually favor organizations that are not for profit, because even though I do participate in one organization that does make money from companies that pay to match their employees with mentors, I just want to make sure that our incentives are aligned. I don't want to be put in a situation where there's some other motivation to match me up with somebody beyond the pure fit and my ability to help. I don't want there to be a financial motivation that doesn't benefit me or the mentee directly to be a factor in how we get paired or how we get to meet.
Thank you for sharing that. The final question, which is one of our fun questions at the end of the interview. If you were to write a book about your life's journey so far, what would the title of the book be?
Lisa, I knew you were going to ask this question. So I thought about this before, and I probably came up with a dozen answers. Each one of them was terrible, very cliched, and I hated each one of them. The last one I came up with, well, it's the name of an actual book, so I would be plagiarizing if I actually wrote this book by this title. But I think it's going to be The Accidental Tourist. And the reason I choose that is because even though you could look at my career and squint a little bit, look at it from a distance, and it looks very linear, like I said, and I studied the thing that I wanted to do. I then got jobs doing that thing. I had progressive responsibility over the years, and it seems very uneventful and normal. There's a lot of happy and sometimes not so happy accidents that occur along the way that really have a pretty profound impact on where you end up. I'm not done, so there's still accidents waiting to happen in front of me. But that's why I ended up landing on the accidental tourist.
Okay.
But the hardest question you've asked me today. So thank you for that.
You had to think through that many times, right?
Oh, so many times.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Dave.